At 2 in the morning on July the 16th, 1918, a guard knocked on the door of the room where Nicholas Romanov was sleeping and told him to wake his family. They were being moved, the guard said, for their safety. Nicholas woke his wife Alexandra. Alexandra woke their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and their son Alexei, who was 13 years old and had been ill for most of his life with hemophilia and could not walk without help that night. The family dressed. They had been told to dress warmly and bring documents. They brought documents. They dressed warmly. Into the lining of their clothing, the daughters and Alexandra had sewn, over the preceding weeks, approximately 18 pounds of diamonds, pearls, emeralds, and other jewels, the remnants of the Romanov fortune that had not already been confiscated. They had sewn them carefully, methodically, into corsets and bodices and the hems of dresses. They had done this because they believed the jewels might buy their freedom if the opportunity arose. The jewels did not buy their freedom. They did something else entirely. The official Soviet account of what happened next was classified until 1990. This is that account. By July of 1918, Nicholas Romanov had been the former Tsar of Russia for 16 months. He had abdicated on March the 15th, 1917, in a railway carriage outside Pskov, signing over the throne that his family had held for 304 years in a document that took approximately 10 minutes to write. He had intended to abdicate in favor of his son, Alexei. His doctors told him that Alexei would not survive the stress of rule, given his hemophilia. He abdicated in favor of his brother Michael instead. Michael declined the throne the following day. 304 years of Romanov rule ended in 48 hours. The provisional government that took power had kept Nicholas and his family under house arrest at the Alexandra Palace outside Petrograd. When the Bolsheviks seized power in October of 1917, the family was transferred to Tobolsk in Siberia, and then in April of 1918 to Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains. In Yekaterinburg, they were housed in a requisitioned merchant's home that the Bolsheviks had renamed the House of Special Purpose. The name was accurate. The purpose was not immediately disclosed to the people living in it. The Ipatiev House, as it was commonly known, after its former owner, the engineer Nikolai Ipatiev, who had been given 24 hours to vacate, was a 2-story stone building surrounded by a high wooden fence that the Bolsheviks had constructed to prevent the family from seeing or being seen from the street. The windows of the upper floor had been painted over with lime, so that no light could pass through them in either direction. The family of 7, Nicholas, Alexandra, their 5 children, lived in 5 rooms on the upper floor. They were permitted to walk in the garden for 30 minutes per day. Their correspondence was read before it was delivered. Their food was brought from a local Soviet canteen. Nicholas recorded in his diary with a consistency that historians have found both touching and slightly bewildering the weather each morning and the books he was reading. He was reading the works of the historian Saltykov-Shchedrin in the weeks before his death. He noted that he found them interesting. Alexandra read the Bible. The guards played music outside their window at night, which the family could hear through the painted-over glass. Some of the guards were not unkind. This did not change what they had been ordered to do. The decision to execute the Romanov family was made in Moscow, and the precise chain of authorization that produced it has been debated by historians for over a century without final resolution. The circumstantial and documentary evidence points strongly to Lenin and Sverdlov, the chairman of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee, as the primary authorizing figures. The immediate trigger was military. The White Army, the anti-Bolshevik forces fighting in the Russian Civil War, was advancing on Yekaterinburg. By July of 1918, they were approximately 25 miles from the city. The Bolshevik leadership in Yekaterinburg, led by Yakov Yurovsky, received authorization from Moscow to proceed. The authorization, according to Yurovsky's own account written years later, arrived on July the 16th. The execution was scheduled for that night. The family was not told. The family was told they were being moved for their safety. This was in the specific context of July 1918 in revolutionary Russia, the sentence most calculated to produce calm compliance. It worked. At 2 in the morning, Yurovsky went to the family's rooms and delivered the instruction. The family spent approximately 40 minutes dressing and preparing. Nicholas carried Alexei, who could not walk, down the stairs to the ground floor. They were led through a courtyard and into a small semi-basement room, approximately 5 meters by 6 meters, that had been selected because its single window was blocked by an exterior fence, and its walls were thick enough to muffle sound. Chairs were brought for Alexandra and Alexei. Nicholas stood behind Alexei. The 4 daughters stood to one side. The 3 servants who had refused to leave the family, the doctor Eugene Botkin, the maid Anna Demidova, the cook Ivan Karitonov, and the footman Alois Trupp, stood with them. 11 people in a room approximately the size of a large modern bathroom. Yurovsky entered with a document. He read from it. The document stated that the Ural Soviet had condemned the family to death. Nicholas said, according to Yurovsky's account. What? Yurovsky read the document again. Then the shooting began. The execution did not go as planned. It did not go as planned because of the 18 pounds of jewels sewn into the clothing of Alexandra and her daughters. The diamonds and pearls packed into the corsets and bodices effectively functioned as improvised body armor. The first volley killed Nicholas, Alexandra, and the 3 servants. Alexei, sitting in his chair, was wounded but alive. The 4 daughters were also alive, screaming, according to Yurovsky's account, pressing against the wall of the room. The bullets had ricocheted off the jewels sewn into their clothing. Some bullets had deflected entirely. Some had produced wounds that were serious but not immediately fatal. The execution team, 11 men with pistols in a room approximately 5 by 6 meters, had not anticipated this. Nothing in their planning had accounted for the possibility that the targets were wearing several kilograms of diamonds. This was, given the circumstances, an understandable oversight. It did not make the next 20 minutes easier. What followed was documented in Yurovsky's written account, the Yurovsky Note, which he composed in 1920, and which remained classified in Soviet archives until historian Dmitry Volkogonov gained access to it in 1990. The account is specific. It is specific in the way that official documents produced by people who have done terrible things and need to account for them tend to be specific, clinical, procedural, focused on logistics rather than on the human content of what is being described. The daughters were killed with bayonets and additional gunfire. Alexei, who had survived the first volley despite being shot, was killed by Yurovsky personally with 2 shots to the head. The entire execution took approximately 20 minutes from the first shot to the last. The room afterward was, Yurovsky noted, in considerable disorder. The smoke from the gunfire in the enclosed space was thick enough that the executioners could barely see. The bodies were wrapped in sheets and carried to a waiting truck. It was approximately 3 in the morning. The White Army arrived in Yekaterinburg 8 days later. They found the Ipatiev House empty. The concealment of the bodies was, by Yurovsky's account, considerably more difficult than the execution. The first burial site, a mineshaft outside Yekaterinburg, was deemed insufficient because it was too easily discoverable. The bodies were retrieved and driven to a second location. The truck carrying them became stuck in the mud en route. A decision was made to bury them where the truck had stopped, in a swampy area near a road called Porosenkov Log. The bodies were doused with sulfuric acid to hinder identification. 2 of the bodies, Alexei and one of the daughters, believed to be Maria, were burned separately and buried in a different location approximately 70 meters away. The graves were unmarked. The location was known only to the people who had been present. They did not talk about it. The Soviet state did not talk about it. For 61 years, the burial site was officially unknown. In 1979, a Soviet geologist named Alexander Avdonin located the main grave based on archival research. He told almost nobody. He covered the site back up. He waited. The myth of Anastasia, the surviving Romanov daughter, is one of the most persistent false narratives in 20th century history, and it is worth addressing directly because it has shaped the popular understanding of what happened in the Ipatiev House more thoroughly than almost any other piece of misinformation. Anna Anderson, the woman who claimed from 1920 until her death in 1984 to be Anastasia Romanov, was not Anastasia Romanov. DNA testing conducted in 1994 on tissue samples preserved from her medical records established with certainty that she was Franziska Szankowska, a Polish factory worker who had suffered a mental breakdown. The romantic appeal of the surviving princess story was so powerful that it survived 7 decades of skepticism, multiple court cases in Germany, and the testimony of people who had actually known Anastasia and found Anderson unconvincing. It survived because people wanted it to be true. The 1997 animated film, which is charming and entirely fictional, ensured that another generation grew up with the survival story as a cultural default. Anastasia did not survive. Her remains, along with those of her sister Maria, were found in the second burial site in 2007. DNA testing confirmed the identification in 2008. All 7 members of the Romanov family died in the basement of the Ipatiev House. None of them escaped. The story that said otherwise was more comfortable. Comfort and accuracy are not always the same thing. When the White Army took Yekaterinburg on July the 25th, 1918, 8 days after the execution, they found the Ipatiev House abandoned and partially cleaned. They found personal effects of the Romanov family. They found bullet holes in the basement walls. They found blood. They found, in a mineshaft outside the city, burned fragments of clothing, jewelry, and human remains. The investigating magistrate, Nicholas Sokolov, conducted a thorough investigation that produced a detailed reconstruction of the events of July the 16th. His report was published in Paris in 1924 after he had fled Russia with the White Army's retreat. It was largely accurate. The Soviet government did not acknowledge the execution officially for years. They eventually acknowledged that Nicholas had been shot. They did not acknowledge the deaths of Alexandra and the children for considerably longer. The official position evolved with the political situation. This is not a characteristic unique to Soviet governments, but the Soviet government practiced it with particular consistency. The Romanov family's imprisonment lasted from March of 1917 to July of 1918, 16 months. They lived in 4 different locations during that period: Tsarskoye Selo, Tobolsk, and Yekaterinburg, with a brief stop at Tyumen. The Ipatiev House confinement lasted 78 days. The execution team consisted of 11 men, Yurovsky and 10 others drawn from the local Cheka and from Latvian and Hungarian prisoners of war who had joined the Bolshevik cause. The 11 people killed were Nicholas, Alexandra, Olga, aged 22, Tatiana, aged 21, Maria, aged 19, Anastasia, aged 17, Alexei, aged 13, and the 4 servants. The jewels sewn into the family's clothing weighed approximately 8 kilograms in total. They had been sewn in over a period of weeks before the execution. The women had sewn them personally. The total value of the jewels recovered, those found at the burial site and those recovered from the Ipatiev House after the White Army arrived, was significant but not fully accountable. Some were never found. The main burial site was officially identified in 1991. The second site, containing Alexei and Maria, was identified in 2007. The Russian Orthodox Church canonized the family as passion bearers in 2000. The Ipatiev House was demolished in 1977 on the orders of the Regional Communist Party secretary. His name was Boris Yeltsin. The Church of All Saints was built on the site of the Ipatiev House in 2003. It is called the Church on the Blood, the Cathedral on the Blood in honor of All Saints resplendent in the Russian land. The basement room where the execution occurred is now a chapel. The dimensions of the chapel are approximately 5 meters by 6 meters. You can stand in it. Thousands of people do, every year. Nicholas Romanov's diary, which recorded the weather and his reading list until 3 days before his death, is preserved in the State Archive of the Russian Federation in Moscow. The last entry was made on July the 13th, 1918. He noted that the weather was warm. He noted that Alexei had a bath for the first time in several days. He noted that the family had spent the evening reading aloud. He did not note any sense of what was coming. Either he did not know, or he knew and chose not to write it down, or he wrote it and someone removed it later. The archive has not resolved this question. The family who went downstairs at 2 in the morning on July the 16th, dressed warmly as they had been asked, carrying their documents, with 18 pounds of diamonds sewn into their clothing and no reliable information about what was waiting for them at the bottom of the stairs. That family left almost no account of what they were thinking in those final minutes. What they left instead was the diary entry about the weather. The weather on July the 13th had been warm.